Welcome to Your Brain On by Salience Learning. I'm Karen Foster.
And I'm Krista Gerhard.
Here's part 3 of my colleagues Amy Parent and Irene Boland's conversation around adaptive learning with Dr. Bob Sottilare.
Part of the adaptive learning approach is to be presenting situations based on some form of input from the learner, whether it be, how they performed on an earlier scenario or assessment, or what kind of background knowledge you're bringing in. Is there anything else that you might want to elaborate around that?
Sure. So I think goals are important, right? So understanding what the learner's goals are and what the organization's goals are. If it's organizational learning, right, you're going to build a program for an organization. What are their goals, right? And then, is there a close mesh? There should be. I would hope there would be close mesh if you're at a particular organization and you plan to stay there, that you see a relationship in terms of values between what your goals are and what the organization's goals are, and those things are closely related. So I think that's important to consider. And that it affects things like motivation and engagement, right? So if I don't really have any interest in learning about 4A transforms, I used to when I was an undergrad, right? But if I had no reason to learn about them, having somebody get up and present a whole bunch of content about how to use and apply 4A transforms is not really going to be that exciting to me. And so I think utility weighs a lot, right? Hey, is there going to be an opportunity for a learner to use the information or the skills that they develop, right? This is part of the, I think, frustration with some of the, the current educational system is, some learners want to be very focused. Hey, I'm an engineer. I want to learn about engineering principles, and you're sending me to a course on humanities, but the organizations that are there have different goals, right? They want to kind of round you out, right? You're not just an engineer, you're a person, right? And so exposure to other things besides your major discipline is important in terms of the organizational goals. So that's where there could be like a disconnect, but there shouldn't be.
And that can be potentially fostered through the use of adaptive learning principles, systems, rules that you can then combine both context, interests, and needs together through exercises and opportunity, as you talked about.
A lot of our clients have folks who have to develop soft skills specifically around conversation. And so I know you were saying, you mentioned soft skills before and deliberate practice and the ideal benefit of one-to-one coaching. But in a lot of cases where you have so many people who have the charge to go and speak to the customer, but in a very specific way in terms of what they're listening for and what they can and cannot say, do you find that soft skills are easier to teach or hard skills are easier? And if someone was looking to use adaptive learning to foster conversation-related skills, what's the best approach for something like that?
Wow. Yeah. So there are a group of adaptive instructional systems that are a category that are, conversational agents, right? And so, these are things like auto tutor are based on conversational agents. And it would be relatively easy to have an interaction with a virtual tutor or a peer in the context of an auto tutor course, and to maybe you pretend you're at dinner, right? And you're okay. It's time to make small talk, and so make small talk. And then this is what you know about the client on the other side of the table, right? And or maybe this is how you learn more about that particular client. And so I think just sometimes jumping in and doing is better than having a whole bunch of rules to that may bind you in terms of or limit you in terms of how you build that expertise. Over time, get a few rules in there. Hey, these are the basics, and then let them apply those. And then and then maybe you increase the complexity of the rules or increase the flexibility of the model in terms of how it's assessed to go into more and more difficult kinds of scenarios where they can interact. I would say that most people, and it's not just it's not just me or you. I would say most people are more effective when they can apply their knowledge.
And like you mentioned before, where they're willing to ask more questions to a system than a person, having that adaptive system would give them a safe place to practice and make mistakes without real consequences.
So, Bob, I walked away with a few really key takeaways today, and I was wondering, if I could just take a moment to summarize that and give you a chance to add anything in. When we talk about adaptive learning or adaptive instruction, what we're talking about fundamentally is the ability to accommodate differences in learnings, to increase the probability and the opportunity for the learner to gain from that learning, transfer it into whatever situation it needs to. That was the first thing I kind of took away there. And then from there, the way in which you do that, that's where we get into differences in terms of, pedagogical approaches. For, like you made the the analogy to tutor, right? The real tutor versus computer systems and technology tools, where we started to talk about things like assessments and onboarding and scenarios that are based on rules or some kind of input criteria and output direction. I'm wondering at the end of the day, even if you're a novice learning designer, an experienced designer of learning, what is maybe a couple of the things that you could start doing now to start to experiment with adaptive learning, build it into your learning programs with some specific impact that you're after?
Sure. So adaptive systems are primarily data-driven kinds of systems, right? They're looking for something, a behavior, then it's quantified in some way or categorized or classified. And then it uses that to make decisions, right? And so if the data is poorly represented, if there's not enough of it, sometimes it it's important to understand how complex do you want to get, and if you want to start with something relatively easy to do to build some adaptability into your learning, organizational learning systems. One of the things that I would do is I would tag data and tag content, right? So this is relatively easy. It's kind of tedious, but smart computer science people now have figured out how to write scripts to tag data, different kinds of data, right? And then that data can easily be sorted when you're looking for, hey, I want to ask a medium difficulty question in this domain, right? So you don't have to be like a super instructional designer genius to be able to do that. It's really kind of a simple thing to be able to do. And then the other thing is start with pretty well defined domains that have maybe had lots of I call density, right? Lots of people who've taken a particular course or topic. Then you can start to build rules, right? You don't obviously don't want to build rules because they're inflexible if you don't really understand what the domain is and what you should do when a student's having a particular challenge, right? Whether it's emotions or it's something else. And so, um, yeah, it's important to be able to like start with simple things. I'd start with rule-based stuff, very well defined. Hey, I understand how math works, right? And so if I'm teaching somebody how to add and subtract and multiply and divide, there's a set of rules that have been gone over and over and over again. If it's something more complex than that, maybe you're in a decision tree. And then if you're even more complex than that and you want something that's relatively flexible and maybe reinforces itself, right, improves itself over time, then maybe it's a Markov model or something like that, right? And so the expertise required to implement those things goes up. But again, automation might be another big piece of being able to implement these systems and have them be practical and affordable. Right. Right now, they're generally built by lots of high-paid people that require lots of time to design and build and test them. And buying a commercial off-the-shelf product might be good if it fits well with your organizational learning goals, right? It doesn't mean you have to build it, right? It's that constant corporate decision, make or buy.
I really liked how you began this part of the conversation by really beginning with your data. And I think that's a really great place for everyone to really lean in on, because it is the one thing that at the end of the day, we all are driven by within our organizations to some degree or another. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to think about what success looks like, whether it be through a capability model or it be a decision tree model, like you said, or rules. Can you get through this, mock scenario and make the right decisions along the way, kind of thing? And data is a really accessible place for us. So I appreciate that.
Bob, I wondered, earlier you mentioned trying things out, right? Doing a pilot test, seeing how things work. Once a person or a team has gotten through that pilot phase and they're ready to grow and expand their use of adaptive learning, what do they need to keep in mind in terms of the data they would need, the kinds of goals that are reasonable, what kind of cost or time it would take to really be able to scale that?
Yeah. So when you're thinking about designing these systems, obviously data availability is a big deal. How are you going to source that data? How does that data move in your system, right? Is it edge processed where everything's kind of hey, the data gets generated locally and it gets processed locally and then it's stored locally, right? Or is it more cloud-based on the other end of the spectrum where things are moving around? How does it get protected while it's moving around? Because there's lots of current laws and lots of evolving laws about how to protect and use learner data, how you can use it, right? And how long you can use it. It limits you also, right? And who owns it? So that's a big consideration. The less data you need in order to make decisions, right? So, I wouldn't design a rocket ship to go down to the corner grocery store. I design design it for what I need. So both data availability and protection are important. I think it's also important because, again, you're go and read and you're looking for reference implementations and maybe you've done a study, but understanding, the maturity level of the technology or technologies that you're looking at. So you understand that there's a difference between state of art and state of practice, right? So, hey, something that's state of art, hey, some university people are doing this, blah, 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 blah. You might decide it's worth the risk for you to use that because it's low cost or it's free. right? The implementation is easy or whatever the reason is, but there's some, there's some monetary thing, right? Or that's driving you to use that. Or you might decide, hey, that's not worth doing. So understanding the maturity of the technology is important. And then, the other thing that I mean, I work for an AI company. Right? So,
Yeah.
I'm biased by that, admittedly. And there's a reason that I kind of self-selected to be at the company that I'm at. And that's, automation, right? These systems are super complex. Like I said before, they're built by interdisciplinary teams that, tons of people who have highfalutin degrees and they get paid a lot of money, and it takes a lot of time to build these, and they're kind of handcrafted things, right? And you want to be able to reduce some of that cost. And so I would say if you're going to engage with people to build systems, make sure you're thinking about what all the end users, right? It's not just the learner, it's also the instructional designer, it's the data analysis person, it's the research psychologist, it's maybe a human factors person. And that those things are important to understand. Hey, how can you make their job easier so the cost of the total cost of that system, the maintenance of it, the future development of courses is less.
So in the spirit, Bob, of rules and data, which we've talked a lot about being a really key principle behind being able to adapt learning to meet people's individual differences and needs. In the spirit of that, what would you say might be the 3 ifs that you would want to ask yourself that would point you to adaptive learning as a strategy to explore? So, for example, like if you are looking to X.
Okay, so I would say, to me, there's always a business case, right, as well as an effectiveness or impact that's associated with any kind of technology that you're going to implement or use or buy. And so I think the return on investment ought to be considered about what you expect to get out of that system, right? And go back to the analogy of, hey, I don't build a rocket ship to go to the corner grocery store, because a bicycle will probably do, or a car. And so think about what you're trying to get out of it. Think about the system capabilities that'll be there at the end. And then more importantly, think about how learners are going to access those systems, how you might scale the system, right? Hey, I've built this thing, it's organizational learning for this one division. And now, you have a kind of global company, with 20 divisions all over the place, and you want to expand to that. Is what you're proposing going to be easy to scale? Is it based on current technology? And is it extensible in terms of domains, right? Does it fit? Lots of what's out there now is strictly cognitive kinds of instruction, right? It's problem solving, or maybe some decision making, or something along those lines, or maybe just some analysis of, hey, there's this thing out there, and how do I optimize the outcome? And so if you want to expand into team domains, that's a complexity, right? Because teams are a lot harder to model than learners, so there's going to be a lot more inaccuracies, right? Physical tasks are harder to analyze than cognitive tasks, right? Because everything and what's going on in in a cognitive task, you don't know their thoughts, but you can see all their behaviors and all their interactions. And that might be more difficult to capture in a physical task where they're outside the system, right, so to speak. So sensors might have a bigger play there. And then lastly, I would say, think about, what your needs are today, and, because they're certainly going to be different 5 years and 10 years down the road. And so, if you can, spend a little bit of time planning up front, I think it's worth it in terms of the implementation to consider how the system will grow. It'll also help you with budget, right? You'll be able to produce a roadmap that now you can brief to, the corporate management, and they can make decisions about that investment and what the return is.
Bob, it has been an absolute pleasure. I've so enjoyed this conversation with you. Every time I talk to you, I learn something more, and take it forward within my own learning design, within my own strategies and ways of thinking in terms of adaptive learning. So absolute pleasure. And thank you for spending the time with us today.
Thank you again.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Your Brain On. Please subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm Krista Gerhard.
And I'm Karen Foster.
And we'll see you next time.